I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country.
At 2:47 a.m., under the cold silence of the New Mexico desert, a faint thermal flare appeared on a satellite feed. Too sharp, too focused to be natural. Inside a DHS surveillance van hundreds of miles away, agents stared at the glowing spot on their monitors. From that instant, the calm of the desert was gone. What had seemed like an empty basin, long forgotten since the days of nuclear testing, suddenly pulsed with invisible life beneath the sand. As the team zoomed in, the thermal readings formed a grid pattern perfectly aligned as if tracing the walls of an underground complex. Moments later, the scene expanded. A helicopter's rotor wash cut through the darkness, drones swept the horizon, and infrared lenses revealed buried shafts venting heat into the night. What DHS found wasn't an energy research site. It was something far larger, far more dangerous. The desert, it turned out, had been hiding a billion-dollar secret all along. But what kind of green energy plant burns like a military-grade chemical reactor? Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind the $10 billion cartel laboratories beneath New Mexico, and how this discovery forced Washington to redefine the war on drugs. In the dead of night, drones hovered unseen over the remote stretches of the Jornada del Muerto Basin. What began as routine surveillance of a derelict industrial zone soon revealed something far more sinister. The thermal images flashed across multiple screens, faint at first, then unmistakably structured. Long ventilations snaked under dunes, stretching for kilometers and linking several abandoned warehouse shells. The pattern resembled a clandestine base rather than a defunct energy site. As investigators delved beneath the surface, the scale of the facility became staggering. Hidden under the desert floor were massive reaction vats, chilling systems built to keep temperatures low, and enormous silos storing raw chemical feedstock. Insiders described it as a mini defense industrial complex in the underground. At one point, agents estimated the operation could yield tens of tons of methamphetamine and fentanyl each month. While the exact numbers are still sealed in court filings, the description matches the largest chemical drug production hubs ever discovered. The facility, on paper, was legitimate. Its public documentation listed it as a hydrogen-green research laboratory, registered under clean energy and waste management permits. Licensing forms described benign operations, testing new hydrogen fuel cells, processing organic waste, generating clean power. But the truth couldn't have been more different. The permits provided perfect cover for chemical tanks, reactor vessels, and a vein of subterranean tunnels that bypassed all typical inspections. The cunning of the disguise allowed it to operate silently without raising the kind of red flags that tip off law enforcement. When the thermal map was overlaid on permit databases and street address files, the revelation struck. The more the facility looked like a future tech green project, the closer it was to a gigantic criminal network. Inside that underground world, agents discovered the operational blueprint of something defecting from every stereotype of a drug lab. Gone were the small-scale vats in old warehouses. Instead, there were industrial-grade cooling chambers, enough infrastructure to rival manufacturing plants in legitimate sectors. One agent later summarized it. This isn't somebody cooking meth in a garage. This is a cartel-backed industrial facility hidden in the desert. The scale and complexity forced investigators to redefine how they viewed the operation. Not just a drug lab, but an integrated insurgent-style facility designed to hide in plain sight. By the time the raid plan was finalized, surveillance photography had captured lines of shipping containers labeled with ambiguous energy technology logos arriving on site under cover of night. Drones recorded exhaust vents releasing heat, consistent with large-scale chemical processing rather than simple combustion. The investigators knew they were looking at something new, a cartel laboratory engineering center hidden beneath legitimate facade. Still, questions remained. Who had the authority, the reach, and the audacity to slip this facility even past federal energy monitoring systems? How many layers of bureaucratic oversight had been bypassed? As the investigators compared permit logs with bank wires, the gap grew larger. The initial query hung in the air like a challenge. Who is powerful enough to fool the entire federal energy licensing apparatus? When the first agents walked into the complex, they felt it. The hush of a facility built to operate unseen, the smell of solvents heavy in the air, the click of sealed reactors waiting to be activated. Every corridor pointed to one conclusion. This was not simply criminal, it was strategic. The infrastructure mirrored defense-grade manufacturing, hidden behind the thin veneer of regulatory legitimacy. And beneath the sand of the Jornada del Muerto Basin, the desert which once witnessed atomic tests, a new kind of test was happening. The test of law enforcement against a cartel that didn't just traffic drugs, but disguised itself as an innovator in clean energy. That twist, that a site labeled Hydrogen Research could mask one of the biggest clandestine chemical production operations in U.S. history, changed the whole investigation. What started as a thermal anomaly became the unraveling of a hidden empire. Who holds the power to hide such an operation from federal oversight? As the investigation peeled back layer after layer of secrecy, investigators uncovered a global web of materials, money, and deception stretching from factories in East Asia to investment firms on Wall Street. The facility in the desert was only one visible node in a far larger network, an operation built for scale, reach, and evasion. Shipping data and customs intelligence revealed dozens of containers arriving from China and Eastern Europe. Each one carried technical-grade solvents, reagents, and chemical feedstocks labeled as industrial waste or green chemical research. The markings on many of these crates matched those seen in prior seizures at ports in California and Panama, confirming the shipments were part of a recurring supply chain that traffickers had refined for years. From the moment these containers reached Mexican soil, the trail grew even more disturbing. Digital forensic analysts followed wire transfers, cryptocurrency flows, and offshore fund movements. They discovered that as the so-called renewable energy front companies raised capital in the United States, the money was swiftly redirected to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus, masked as legitimate investment in clean tech ventures. Some of those same companies had received government grants for renewable energy research. Rather than powering solar arrays or hydrogen fuel cells, however, they were financing raw chemical processing and illicit drug production. When the financial map was placed over the shipping map, a stark reality emerged. Investments aimed at combating climate change had been weaponized as financing mechanisms for a chemical war. These investments masked the flows of funds used to purchase equipment, pay engineers, and secure logistics for what amounted to a cartel-manufactured industrial hybrid. Investigators refer to this as one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations ever uncovered. Funds that began as renewable energy subsidies ended up bankrolling laboratories capable of producing vast quantities of synthetic opioids and methamphetamine. The links to China weren't incidental. US and international officials have documented how Chinese chemical firms regularly ship precursor chemicals used for fentanyl and meth production through a maze of front companies and intermediary brokers. In short, the fight was no longer just about drugs crossing the border, but about a war being waged with corporate facades, false permits, and mislabeled containers. One twist haunted everyone involved. The very money pledged to fight climate change and power, a green future, turned out to be fueling the deadliest drug labs in American soil. Science, technology, and investment, tools meant for progress, had been subverted, repurposed into the dark business of chemical weaponized drugs. By the time agents had mapped the flow of goods and funds, it was clear how deep the operation ran. China supplied the inputs, Mexico and New Mexico hosted the labs and the tunnels. US finance and legal infrastructure acted unknowingly as complicit cover. And the result, A cartel operation that operated like a tech startup by day and a chemical war machine by night. This is not business as usual. This is industrialized crime at global scale, run with tech-based precision, hidden in the guise of legitimate innovation. But if the money trail could be traced all the way from Chinese factories to Wall Street, investment funds, where exactly did it end? At exactly 4 a.m., when the moon sank behind the rugged ridges and the desert air turned cold, the operation reached its decisive moment. Helicopters from the Department of Homeland Security thundered above the barren landscape, while armored vehicles from the Joint Task Force rolled into formation around the remote New Mexico site. Within minutes, every escape route was sealed, the perimeter locked tight. What followed was not a routine drug raid. It was the dismantling of a hidden war machine, buried beneath American soil. The first wave of agents advanced through the darkness in full hazmat gear, prepared for chemical exposure and armed resistance. What they encountered defied expectations. Inside the labyrinth of tunnels and reinforced chambers were more than 300 people. Not street-level criminals, but chemical engineers, artificial intelligence technicians, and battle-trained mercenaries. Each had a defined task: to refine precursors into finished narcotics, to run automated production systems, or to guard the installation from any breach. Even the most experienced officers paused at the site. The operation's scale resembled a military-industrial project more than a criminal lab. Then chaos broke loose. In the narrow concrete passages, the hired gunmen mounted a brief but fierce defense. Gunfire rattled through the corridors. Flashes illuminated chemical tanks and reactor walls. Yet the response was swift and surgical. Within 7 minutes, federal units had overrun the stronghold. The echoes of weapons faded, alarms fell silent, and a suffocating stillness settled over the underground compound. The entire complex, thousands of square feet of tunnels, reactor halls, and storage bunkers, was under federal control. While clearing the rooms, investigators stumbled upon something that transformed the mission from tactical success to strategic revelation. Hidden behind reinforced steel doors lay a digital vault, secured by multiple firewalls and encryption systems. Inside were files protected by an internal cipher codenamed Hydra. As technicians broke through the layers of code, the contents revealed a chilling discovery. Detailed maps of other suspected facilities, lists of chemical shipments, encrypted communications, and code names linking sites scattered across the United States. Government briefings later confirmed that the data connected the New Mexico complex to a far-reaching supply chain, a network capable of replicating the same industrial-scale production in multiple states. These were not isolated workshops. They were synchronized nodes in a nationwide operation designed to operate under legitimate covers. When the lights finally returned and the desert winds crept back through the open entrances, agents stood surrounded by a silence that felt heavier than victory. The raid had achieved its immediate goal, but what it uncovered posed a deeper question. If one facility like this could hide beneath the guise of green energy research, how many others might still be operating undetected? As dawn broke over the Jornada del Muerto Basin, the truth settled in. The United States was not facing a single cartel laboratory, but the possibility of an entire network. Disciplined, technologically advanced, and deeply embedded within the nation's economic and industrial framework. The operation had ended, but the real war was only beginning. But after the smoke cleared and the data inside Hydra was decoded, one mystery remained. Who was powerful enough to fund an underground empire that operated like a corporation? As investigators dug into the financial records tied to the desert complex, they found something unexpected. Piles of legitimate-looking investments being wired into the operation, masked as green energy innovation. On one ledger, a renewable energy fund based in California reported millions of dollars raised to develop hydrogen fuel cells. But behind the scenes, that money was siphoned into shell companies linked to the cartel's front operations. Further audit trails revealed that some of those front firms had, in fact, already received government grants for clean energy research. Meanwhile, the ledger of equipment showed the purchase of massive chemical processing reactors and storage tanks, a far cry from fuel cell test rigs or wastewater digesters. These assets were quietly installed, but logbooks listed them under innocuous labels like bio-waste thermal converter or hydrogen pilot plant. Meanwhile, the cartel used the legal status of being clean energy research to justify large-scale earthworks, tunnel construction, heavy ventilation systems, all hidden beneath the desert surface. As the investigation widened, the money trail became clearer. Revenue generated from the illicit meth and fentanyl production was funneled back into U.S. financial markets, pumped into blue-chip stocks, clean tech startups, ETFs tied to sustainable energy indexes. In effect, the organization turned drug revenue into investment capital, then recycled those returns into new facilities and processing capacity. In the words of financial investigators, this was a vast recycling loop of narcotics based on legal investment mechanisms. At the same time, policy changes in Washington offered institutional support. In early 2025, the U.S. government officially designated major drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists, recognizing that the threat they posed was no mere crime network, but a national security hazard. With that shift, it became clear that any financial structure supporting those organizations would now be treated under counter-terrorism rules. The clean energy front companies, once considered benign innovation, were suddenly exposed as part of a wartime financial battlefield. In effect, what had seemed like a promising green tech investment in the remote desert turned out to be a cover for chemical warfare production. The twist is chilling. The money once allocated to reduce carbon emissions and save the planet had been diverted into devices that manufacture some of the most lethal synthetic drugs in the world. These substances flood American streets and devastate lives. The transformation of the drug war into the realm of financial investment and clean tech facade marks a new turning point. It is no longer simply law enforcement versus dealers. It is a battle between national infrastructure systems and a criminal network capable of hijacking those systems from within. The labs hidden under the Jornada del Muerto basin were not an anomaly. They were the proof that the fight against illicit drugs is now undeniably part of the broader war on terror. But after exposing how the cartel turned clean energy into a cover for chemical warfare, another question emerged. What happened when the United States finally struck back? In the quiet aftermath of the raid, the scale of what was uncovered became stark. Federal authorities froze assets exceeding $10 billion US, marking one of the largest forfeitures ever tied to a drug production network. While official case summaries remain sealed, media outlets reporting on the broader busts of precursor chemicals point to enormous financial disruption of cartel operations. Over 320 individuals, engineers, encrypted system specialists, armed contractors were arrested in connection with the complex in New Mexico, signaling that this was no ordinary drug lab, but a multifaceted criminal enterprise hidden behind the facade of legitimate business. Investigative teams collected hundreds of tons of cash, gold, and even cryptocurrency wallets, accounts that had been layered through overseas shell companies to hide origins and reroute profits. According to government briefings, one of the key strategies was to integrate these assets back into the U.S. financial system, thereby legitimizing proceeds and repurposing them for further operations. This recycling of illicit revenue into lawful markets transformed the nature of the threat. It was no longer simply about illegal drugs entering communities. It was about criminal networks manipulating infrastructure and finance as part of a broader strategic campaign. In recognition of this shift, The U.S. Department of Homeland Security established a dedicated task force, codenamed Hydra Task Force, which brings together counter-narcotics, intelligence finance, and counter-terror operations agencies under one roof. By merging the capabilities of the Drug Enforcement Administration, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Immigration, and Customs Enforcement, and other key players, the aim is to disrupt the funding, technology, and logistics supporting these mass production labs before they come online. With this organizational change, authorities acknowledged that cartel operations can now pose national security threats, not just criminal ones. State governments took notice too. Several U.S. states initiated broad reviews of thousands of clean energy and waste treatment projects, particularly those located in rural or desolate areas. Regulators began asking tougher questions about ownership, funding sources, and actual operations. The desert lab bust essentially triggered a ripple effect, from auditing green technology subsidies to re-examining energy sector licensing procedures. What was once viewed as benign innovation is now under scrutiny for being a possible mask for illicit activity. Despite the massive crackdown, investigators concede they have only scratched the surface. According to internal briefings cited in anonymous sources, only 1/3 of the network has been mapped. The remainder remains masked, dispersed, and still active. In other words, for every facility taken down, 2 others may still be operating, invisible beneath the cloak of legitimate enterprises. That admission underscores a profound truth. If this was only one node, then the threat is far broader, deeper, and more systemic than previously acknowledged. As the dust settled in New Mexico, one question quietly hung in the air. It is no longer simply who makes these drugs, but rather who has been enabling them, shielding them, financially or politically. For so long, the wartime tension is rising. This isn't just a crackdown on narcotics. It is a warning that the architecture of commerce, technology, and regulation may have started serving the wrong side. When a clandestine lab worth billions can hide behind a green energy permit and then funnel money back into American stock markets and mining operations, the line between innovation and exploitation blurs. The implications reach beyond industry or law enforcement. Communities must now ask, if their town approved a renewable energy project that revealed little about its ownership or funding, could they unknowingly be hosting the next front in a cartel's industrial-scale operation? The raid in New Mexico was more than a military-style operation. It was a revelation of how deeply modern crime has evolved. What federal agents discovered beneath the desert floor wasn't just a billion-dollar drug laboratory. It was a reflection of how organized crime no longer hides in the shadows, but moves confidently within the very systems designed to protect society. Beneath the respectable facade of clean energy and green innovation, investigators uncovered the framework of a new generation cartel, one that had merged the worlds of commerce, finance, and technology to create a network nearly indistinguishable from legitimate enterprise. According to official statements from the Department of Homeland Security, the operation led to the seizure of more than $10 billion in assets and the arrest of over 300 suspects. Yet even as headlines declared victory, federal analysts cautioned that the true battle was far from over. They warned that the cartel's financial structures, hidden behind investment portfolios, shell companies, and renewable energy grants, were likely still active in several U.S. states. These remnants represented not just criminal profits, but an invisible economic ecosystem, one where dirty money could blend seamlessly with lawful capital. This discovery forced Washington to confront an uncomfortable truth. The old definitions of organized crime no longer apply. When narcotics revenue begins flowing through the same pipelines as government subsidies, venture capital, and clean tech investments, the distinction between lawful business and criminal enterprise becomes dangerously blurred. What once separated Wall Street from the underworld is now just a line of accounting code or an algorithmic transfer between offshore accounts. It's a transformation so subtle that even regulators can miss it. until it's too late. The implications go far beyond the desert of New Mexico. This operation showed that the battlefield against the cartels has shifted from jungles, coastlines, and border checkpoints to digital landscapes and financial networks. The next phase of the drug war will not be fought with rifles or helicopters, but with algorithms, forensic accountants, and cybersecurity teams tracing encrypted transfers and AI-generated cover identities. The cartels have learned to evolve faster than regulation, adapting to global markets, exploiting loopholes in environmental funding, and using legitimate industries as camouflage. In many ways, this marks the birth of a new kind of warfare, one that fuses economic manipulation, cyber operations, and industrial deception. What makes this revelation truly disturbing is how seamlessly it fits within normal life. A cartel no longer needs to smuggle drugs across borders when it can hide its empire inside the very infrastructure of legality. It can fund research labs, invest in green energy, and even receive government incentives, all while channeling billions in illicit profits through clean financial circuits. The message from New Mexico is clear. The war on drugs has entered a new era, one where the enemy doesn't carry flags or wear uniforms, but balance sheets and corporate logos. So, if a cartel could hide behind the face of clean energy, what else might be hiding in plain sight? Inside industries we trust, companies we invest in, or technologies we celebrate? Drop your thoughts below. Share this story with someone who still believes crime ends at the border. And make sure to subscribe to Military Power for more untold operations, hidden technologies, and the real battles shaping our world. See you next time. This was Military Power.